The world is watching Alaska this Friday. President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are set to meet for the first time since Moscow's 2022 invasion of Ukraine.
In Alaska, it will be the first in-person meeting between leaders of the U.S. and Russia since Moscow launched its deadly 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Putin reportedly told U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff this week that he's willing to halt the war if Ukraine simply hands over the Donbas region in the eastern part of the country.
Putin has reportedly told U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff he's willing to halt the war if Ukraine hands over the Donbas region. This marks a critical moment in the nearly 3-year conflict that has reshaped global politics. But Ukraine's President Zelenskyy just dropped a bombshell that changes everything.
Not give their land to the occupier. Any decisions that are against us, any decisions that are without Ukraine, are at the same time decisions against peace. They will not achieve anything. These are dead solutions. They will never work.
The Ukrainian leader has made it absolutely clear Ukraine will not give up any land to the occupier. He's declared that any decisions made without Ukraine are dead solutions that will never work. His message is uncompromising and direct. While diplomats prepare for handshakes and photo ops, Ukrainian intelligence is painting a very different picture of what Putin is actually planning, and it's not peace. Zelenskyy didn't mince words in his latest video message. He said Putin is definitely not preparing for a ceasefire or an end to the war. Instead, Russian forces are being redeployed in ways that suggest preparations for new offensive operations. If someone is preparing for peace, Zelenskyy warned, this is not what he does. This revelation comes at a crucial moment. The Alaska meeting is being billed as peace negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. But according to Ukrainian intelligence and military commanders, Putin intends to present this meeting as a personal victory and then continue acting exactly as before in the war on Ukraine. So what's really happening on the ground? Ukraine's military spokesperson for the southern frontline sector told Reuters that Russia is moving military units in the Zaporizhia region for further assaults. These aren't the movements of an army preparing to lay down arms. These are the tactical repositions of forces getting ready for their next strike. The timing couldn't be more significant. Trump has been pushing for what he calls territorial swapping between Russia and Ukraine.
Agreeing to meet with him in person in Alaska. That's Friday. By the way, American soil. Trump also preemptively signed a peace deal that would involve Ukraine ceding territory to Russia, which President Zelensky's rejected. So we know Trump is thirsty for a deal, but do you see him demanding any concessions from Putin? What else does Putin want besides Ukrainian territory?
Former State Department official Ned Price has analyzed these developments with deep concern. Trump has already made 2 major concessions to Putin, dropping the deadline for Russia to stop bombing Ukraine and excluding President Zelenskyy from the meeting despite initial promises. This means Trump and Putin will be discussing Ukraine's territorial integrity without Ukraine present, drawing troubling parallels to previous unsuccessful Trump-Putin meetings. At a news conference on Monday, Trump said there would be some land swapping going on, claiming it would be for the good of Ukraine. But Zelenskyy's response was swift and uncompromising. Russia refuses to stop the killings, he said, and therefore must not receive any rewards or benefits. Concessions do not persuade a killer. This isn't just Ukrainian skepticism. It's based on hard intelligence about Russian military movements and strategic positioning. The pattern emerging from Ukrainian intelligence reports suggests Putin is using the prospect of peace talks as cover for military preparation, not genuine diplomatic engagement. But there's an even deeper strategic game at play here. European leaders are growing increasingly concerned about being sidelined from these negotiations.
According to the New York Times, citing undisclosed sources, Dmitry Kozak, a deputy head of Putin's administration and a longtime Kremlin insider, has recently urged Putin to stop the war in Ukraine and begin peace talks. Kozak, once a key figure in handling Ukrainian affairs, reportedly presented a plan to end hostilities alongside proposals for internal reforms. Before Russia declared war against Ukraine in 2022, he had warned Putin about the risks of strong Ukrainian resistance and later tried, unsuccessfully, to negotiate a truce.
A New York Times report has revealed that Dmitry Kozak, a deputy head of Putin's administration and longtime Kremlin insider, has been urging Putin to stop the war in Ukraine and begin peace talks. Kozak previously handled Ukrainian affairs and had warned Putin about Ukrainian resistance before the 2022 invasion. This internal pressure adds another layer of complexity to the diplomatic landscape. Initially, Trump suggested that any meeting with Putin would require Zelensky's presence. But he later walked back that condition, raising the specter of bilateral negotiations that could freeze out Ukraine entirely. The European Union has made their position crystal clear. EU policy chief Kaja Kallas said Russia has not agreed to a full and unconditional ceasefire, so they should not even discuss any concessions. She emphasized that sequencing matters. First, an unconditional ceasefire with strong monitoring and ironclad security guarantees. This isn't just about Ukraine's territorial integrity, it's about the fundamental principle of whether international borders can be changed by force. In a joint statement, European leaders welcomed the Trump-Putin meeting but emphasized the need to keep pressure on Russia and protect the security interests of Ukraine and Europe as a whole. They remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force. Zelenskyy has been working the phones with allied leaders. He spoke with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and told him that the Russians simply want to buy time, not end the war. The situation on the battlefield and Russia's continued strikes on civilian infrastructure prove this clearly, Zelenskyy said. The Ukrainian president's warnings aren't happening in a vacuum. They're supported by concrete military intelligence about Russian force movements and strategic positioning. Ukrainian military commanders are reporting Russian redeployment patterns consistent with offensive preparations, not defensive consolidation or withdrawal. This creates a dangerous dynamic heading into Friday's Alaska meeting. While Trump may be hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough, Putin appears to be positioning himself for a propaganda victory, followed by continued military action. The Russian leader gets the legitimacy of meeting with the American president while maintaining his military pressure on Ukraine. For Ukraine, the stakes couldn't be higher. Zelenskyy has made it clear that any decisions made against Ukraine or without Ukraine are decisions against peace. These are dead solutions that will never work, he said. Ukraine needs a real, living peace that people will respect. The broader implications extend far beyond Ukraine's borders. If Putin can successfully use peace talks as cover for military preparation while extracting territorial concessions, it sets a dangerous precedent for international relations. Other authoritarian leaders would take note that aggression can be rewarded through diplomatic theater. Trump's approach has been to set deadlines and threaten economic consequences if Putin doesn't agree to peace terms. But those ultimatums haven't prompted the Kremlin to move 1 inch on the war, other than agreeing to this Alaska meeting. The danger, as some analysts see it, is that Trump might be so pleased by getting Putin to the negotiating table that he accepts any offer that's made. The geographic and strategic realities also work against Ukraine in these negotiations. The narrow Suwalki Gap between Poland and Lithuania remains NATO's Achilles heel, potentially allowing Russia to cut off the Baltic states from the rest of the alliance. This vulnerability gives Putin leverage in any broader regional security discussion. Meanwhile, the human cost continues to mount. Ukrainian civilians are still being targeted by Russian strikes on infrastructure and residential areas. For ordinary Ukrainians, the prospect of territorial concessions feels like betrayal of everyone who has died defending their homeland. Public opinion in Ukraine reflects this sentiment. When asked about potential territorial swaps, ordinary Ukrainians describe the prospect as unfair and horrible. They point to the thousands who have died and the people still waiting under occupation for liberation. The intelligence picture that Zelenskyy is painting suggests Putin is playing a longer game. Rather than seeking genuine peace, he may be using these talks to buy time for military repositioning while testing Western resolve. The Russian leader has shown repeatedly that he views diplomatic engagement as another front in warfare, not an alternative to it. This puts enormous pressure on the Alaska meeting. If Trump accepts Putin's terms without Ukrainian consent, it could fracture the Western alliance and reward aggression. If the talks fail, Putin gets to blame American intransigence while continuing his military campaign with renewed justification. Zelensky's intelligence briefing reveals the fundamental disconnect between diplomatic appearances and military reality. While the world focuses on the symbolism of Trump and Putin meeting, Russian forces are positioning for their next offensive. The Ukrainian president is essentially warning that peace talks might be the prelude to escalation, not resolution. The timing of Russian military movements supports Zelensky's assessment. These aren't the actions of a country preparing for peace. They're the preparations of a military machine getting ready for its next phase of operations. Putin appears to be betting that he can extract concessions through diplomacy while maintaining military pressure through force. For Trump, this creates a difficult choice. He campaigned on ending the war in Ukraine quickly, but Putin seems determined to continue fighting regardless of diplomatic engagement. The Russian leader may be calculating that he can get territorial gains through negotiations while keeping the option of further military action on the table. The Alaska meeting will test whether Putin is genuinely interested in peace or simply using diplomacy as another weapon of war. Zelensky's intelligence briefing suggests the answer is already clear. Russia is preparing for new offensive operations, not a ceasefire. The question is whether the international community will recognize this reality before it's too late. As Friday approaches, the gap between diplomatic hopes and military reality continues to widen. While negotiators prepare for peace talks, Ukrainian intelligence is tracking Russian forces preparing for war. Zelensky's warning couldn't be clearer. Putin is not preparing for peace, he's preparing for victory through continued aggression. The stakes of the Alaska meeting extend far beyond Ukraine. They will determine whether international law and territorial sovereignty can be defended through diplomacy, or whether military aggression will be rewarded with territorial concessions. Zelensky has made Ukraine's position clear. They will not give their land to occupiers, regardless of what happens in Alaska. Thanks for watching. If you want to stay updated on how this diplomatic crisis unfolds and what it means for global security, make sure to subscribe for more breaking news analysis. The Alaska meeting could reshape international relations for decades to come.